This is the city room of the Cleveland Press, the new home of a man who's made an important mark in Cleveland sports. Hi, I'm Jim Finnerty. Welcome to PM Magazine. Tonight we'll meet sports columnist and man about town, Dan Coughlin. I don't know if you read the sports pages, but if you do, the name Dan Coughlin is undoubtedly familiar to you. His vignettes of American life and his profiles of colorful personalities are a part of this town's sports scene. He weaves together diverse elements into his own particular fabric of writing fun, and in doing so, has some fun along the way.
I can look any man in the house, starting with you, Mary Zone.
How are you?
Famous political figure, Terry Novak. Famous raconteur, man about town, James Coughlin, no relation.
You can't look at me anyway.
You meet the darndest people in this joint. You know, I've discovered some great stories here at Pat Joyce's Saloon. Light beer, please. What's good for Billy Martin is good enough for me.
The bar is Pat Joyce's. The man, none other than Cleveland sports columnist Dan Coughlin, whose beer may be light and less filling, but whose style, while light, has been filling Cleveland newspapers with some of the most humorous journalism in the country for the past 18 years. Dan Coughlin, it can be said, writes about sports, but sometimes in a larger vein than just the cold statistics of what happens on the playing field. He crisscrosses Cleveland from bars to locker rooms, picking up tidbits here and there, which give his readers the flavor of her town and her people.
All I'm thinking about is the reader. What will tickle his or her funny bone, and what they're interested in. And, you know, writing a story is not a personal exercise to delight ourselves. We're writing for as many as a million people might read that story on any given day. And they're the only ones I have in mind when I write the story.
Dan began writing for the Plain Dealer in 1964 after getting out of the Army. He quickly developed a style that included practical jokes and taking part in what he wrote about, like the time he joined the Parma football team, passing himself off as a student from Chicago. Dan didn't fool anyone, but it made for great reading. After 18 years at the PD, Dan joined the Cleveland Press in April, saying he took the job simply because they asked him. Do you think a lot of people take sports too seriously?
Oh, yes. Yeah. It's just fun and games, for heaven's sake. Oh, there are some serious moments, but in the whole scope of things, really, sports is to entertain us and give us pleasure. And the Sportswriter we're not an extension of sports, but I think that we have to maintain the same attitude that the people read the sports page to be entertained. And so when we inform them, we have to entertain them at the same time.
What kind of stories do you like to write best?
About people, individuals, people with an unusual story. Take Junior O'Malley, one of the greatest characters I've ever met in my life, the last of a dying breed, a racetrack figure right out of the Runyons of the 1920s.
Junior O'Malley is one of Dan's favorite subjects. A man never far from a racing form, he's been featured in a number of columns. Dan calls him a lovable, irascible Irishman, which is just what Junior says about Dan.
Just that Irish pixie leprechaun way that he's got about him. You can't, when you're around Danny, you gotta be up. You can't be down around him. He just lights up every place he ever goes, or everything he ever does, and he's scheming all the time. You ever look at him? Watch him. You might be telling him a story, but you watch him, the wheels are turning, the eyes are light, and he's thinking about something else all the time.
People make the best reading. They can be as entertaining off the field as they are on the field, and that's what I search out, these great characters with a wonderful story to tell. Joe Charbonneau. When I met him, I thought that I had died and gone to heaven. I mean, here's the guy that pulled his own tooth with a vice grip and dug the tattoo out of his arm with a razor blade. And the bizarre stories of Joe Charbonneau go on and on. Why, this is a columnist's dream.
What about you? Were you a great sports participant when you were growing up?
I was, really, I was one of the greatest athletes ever to come out of Notre Dame. I was the captain of Notre Dame's NCAA championship beer drinking team. Beyond that, my athletic skills were very limited at one time. I was the player, manager, owner of the world's worst Sunday morning softball team. The only reason I played was because I bought the T-shirts and the beer.
But if Dan wasn't a great sport as a youngster, his wife Maddie will tell you that he's more than competitive at home. While their baby son Joe looks on, Maddie and Dan will often engage in a favorite game of Scrabble. Maddie, Dan works with words all the time. How is he when it comes to Scrabble?
Well, the thing about Dan's Scrabble game is that he doesn't observe the time limit. And so I often find myself asleep when it comes around to my turn. So
What's she saying?
In that way, he does manage to win more games than I do.
I see. I'm glad she admitted I lead the overall series.
With a wife, new baby at home, and another on the way, Dan admits his life has changed. But unchanged is the way he says he'll continue to look at life.
Jim, when I grow up, I don't know. I'd like to grow up. That's it. I would just like to grow up when I'm about 65. In the meantime, I still haven't held down a real job. And if I can go to age 65 without holding down a real job, then I'll grow up and maybe do something that normal people do. I hope it's not retire, but maybe I'll get a job as a bartender.
As I mentioned, Dan's writing goes far beyond the mere reportage of everyday sports. In fact, every day is sort of like a game in Dan's life, and he runs down the score just in case you haven't caught it. Tuesdays and Thursdays, Saturday and Sunday in the press.